this is Lance Thanksgiving Poetry. I'm so excited to be at Sagebrush Cafe, a local coffee house and art house in my community. I'm here with artist and business owner Eric Martin, whose show you just barely caught before it came down, right? So I'm so excited to talk about his work. I've been watching it evolve for the last 10 years, and so I would say that you're, at this moment, anyways, a collage and a assemblage artist. So do you even define yourself? Do you do that?
I don't show in proper galleries, so I don't have a need, I suppose,
to define?
Fix definition. Yeah, but that sounds fine.
That actually sounds like a good reason not to be in proper galleries, is because then you don't have to put yourself in a dictionary.
Yeah, it's wide open.
It's wide open. Yeah. So the theme for this month is products, which I think is really interesting that you brought up galleries, because I didn't even think about talking about that, like the gallery structure. And the gallery structure, of course, is really fixated on product. And that's what this month is about, is produce, right? So we sow our seeds in the ground, and then harvest comes from that, right? And from that harvest, other creatures eat, and other life springs forth. But, it's a begotten, biblical beginning, without really, I don't know. But just, I don't know, how do you explain that? Like, what is the difference between process and product? Is there a difference between the two? In art, where's the moment of harvest, And then also kind of looking at, your art always takes urban, sort of like an urban backdrop, and then puts nature, infuses nature into it. So I'm curious for you to take us on like a journey through your work and your process, and then also what you think about your product.
So I've been a big fan of your work for a long time, and I've actually been watching it grow. And one of the things that I've noticed about your pieces is that, it's kind of like music, right? So some people, when they listen to a song, they hear the sound first, and other people hear the lyrics. And since I'm primarily a writer, I always hear the lyrics to songs. But I think the same is true of your art pieces. Like, whenever I go to look at them, I look at the text first, and then I try to figure out what the text means or I look at the text as if it will help me define what's going on in the images. But I'm not sure that that's what your intention is or what your process is, so.
Yeah, the text here is part of the process. It's part of what is just there to draw from, right? I'm a writer as well, and I have all these books to use. And so as a primary element, it's where the art can grow from. And that's what I use as the base for most of these pieces. The bottom of the piece, the bottom layer is text, book pages and maps and things like that. And they form the background of the piece, and they're juxtaposed to the nature, or images from nature that make it on top. And so for me, the language then becomes a commentary on the way that we view nature, right? We see nature through the lens of language most of the time, even if we don't want to. Language comes in between us and the bird, because when we see the bird, we don't see it as its own entity. We see it as the word bird, right, flying around. It is a named thing, and that's the basis of, or the nature of, our relationship to nature. That's the character of our experience even when we walk outside, to be away from things, to be away from the urban. We're still imbued with language. It is the kind of vehicle of thought, and so all of our thoughts, even about the most natural things, the things that might be most closest to being unnameable, are still filtered through language. So that's kind of what language is doing here. It's a commentary on the way that we relate to nature, the way that we see it by necessity.
No, I think so. One of the things, like, my focal point with the theme of nature is on plants. And I find it almost hysterical. Like, there's always these huge battles over what the name of a plant is. And so you can literally have the same plant, but depending on what name it has, like, you might end up paying $50 more for that plant as like a collector, just because the way that our brains organize things and try to make sense of them.
Yeah, we put a lot of weight on nomenclature, and that's why there was a whole debate about whether tomatoes were fruits or vegetables, right? It doesn't really matter. We're still going to make pasta with a tomato. It doesn't really matter, but we debate it. We find it curious and interesting, because language has a certain role for us in the way that we think, in the way that we talk about things, and in the way that we kind of take control over the world to some extent, right?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before too, because I was talking about one of the reasons I love your work is that it upsets me, right? And on many different levels. So the first thing that kind of upsets me is just scale and size and sort of the absurdity of things. So, like, there's this giant bird based on the size of that couch, right? Mm-hmm. So that's very Alfred Hitchcock, the birds kind of feeling, right? Even though aesthetically your portraits are so beautiful, right? They have balance, and they seem to be, but there's also something going on here that goes back to like what you were saying, the conscious and the subconscious. So in the conscious world, we have these things that are, we've made them, we've created them. We absolutely are into controlling our environments. Like every environment we go into, there's air conditioning, heating, sometimes multiple forms of air conditioning and heating. Like in this absurd way, it was cheaper for me to get individual heating and air conditioning units for every room of my little house than to just have one, right? So just these layers of ultimate control, and then you put nature in there. So I was kind of curious about what the birds are in contrast to this like controlled environment you put them in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm glad you say it. Birds are these kind of uncontrollable beings, right? They like the cuckoo has a crazy eye. Most birds have just black eyes. You look into those black eyes and it's difficult to understand what's going on in their mind. They are a kind of figure of chaos in a sense. You know, you can't control a bird, and the more you might try to approach a bird in order to capture it, the more quickly it will just escape, right? So that's true of a lot of nature. We engage with nature as an engagement with the inscrutable, right? That which we can't quite take command of or fully understand, even though we know that we're connected to it, right? So the way that we had talked about it before is art in general, to generalize broadly, art is a process of taking the internal, your ideas, your kind of psychological material, and making it external. You externalize your internal experience, and it's the external world that we can't quite control that is kind of symbolized in these birds. And so there's maybe a link, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but maybe there's a link between the idea of nature, represented here as birds, and a kind of interior space that we can't quite control. The unconscious, which is, part of our lives, it's part of our mind, it's part of what makes us who we are, it's part of the self, but it's a part of the self that we don't have control of, right? And we might try to approach the unconscious, but with very little possibility of, actually penetrating what is down there in the depths, right? And so, just like birds, we can try to approach that content, try to approach that area of the self, that thing that we know is part of us, that we connect to, that we sympathize with, even identify with, but that we don't have any control over, right? And so generally speaking, nature can be taken as that kind of representation of the unconscious. It's part of our world, it's part of who we are, it's part of our identity, but it's also outside of our control in ways that are sometimes troubling, but a lot of times very, very much a draw. It's a draw to us, right? We're drawn to these images of the parts of ourselves that we can't quite capture.
Yeah, no, I definitely get all of that from your work, which is, I think you're so genuinely Eric Martin. I think you're just so genuinely who you are, and that's what makes the work so intriguing. Is I honestly think no one else on the planet could make these but you, because you're this nice sort of blend of like writer, artist, philosopher, right? So all of these things are here, but not in like, they're not overstated. You could still just look at it and love it for being beautiful, right? Or love it for being kind of upsetting in its absurdity. And so, and everything that you were talking about to me reminds me of like the philosopher Lacan, who like definitely said that certain animals we relate to closer as human beings. So like birds will name a human name, but dogs, we normally never give a human name to dogs because dogs are separate from us. But birds are like this metaphor for imagination, for freedom, for reaching heights, you know what I mean? And so I find that really interesting.
And I think, sorry to jump in, but I think that's ironic too, right? Dogs are these creatures who we can directly empathize with, who we know kind of understand us, and we understand them. You can really picture what's going on in a dog's head. Maybe not perfectly, but way more closely than you can imagine what happens in a bird's mind.
Oh no, absolutely. Look, we bred dogs to love us. Like that's what I find so ethically challenging is like for centuries, since the beginning of human interaction with animals. Like, we have bred these poor animals to have no other option but to love us.
Yeah, well, and they do a great job.
Yeah, they do, and sometimes we treat them really badly, right? So that's a really interesting, and keep them separate from us, even though we've designed them to be for us. That's complicated. And then birds are kind of interesting too. We're way off topic, but so there was a whole group of scientists for the longest time that were trying to pull out different genes from bird embryos so that they could make a chicken look more like a dinosaur.
Oh,
The idea, you know,
that's
being,
worthwhile.
yeah.
That's good science.
But I think that's another thing, like, these birds go back, like, pre-human history, and maybe go further into the future of human history somehow. So we get, like, angels, right? Like, why would we give, like, a human figure wings and say that that's God's favorite creature? You know, there's a whole bunch of kind of fun things that happen with birds. And so, I mean, so with how they relate in your pictures, like, how did you decide on, like, size and scope? Like, what, I guess, did you have an intention with how you wanted people to view these birds? Like,
No, I mean, sometimes the birds are monstrous, you know, and sometimes the birds, yeah, they take on a giant scale, and I think that really helps to play into the idea that they might represent parts of the unconscious. And we have birds like these that are on a chair. They're in an interior space. They're occupying what is otherwise a completely domestic zone, but they occupy it with that monstrosity, with the chaos that they kind of represent. And also with that kind of yearning for identification. So I think that the larger the bird is in comparison to the furniture, as it were, the more of a comment it is on just how much we are occupied by the kind of unconscious forces that we know are there, but yet we also recognize we can't control. Why do people make art? And if you are in the process of making it, why are you making it? You know, and I think there's always more than one answer to that question, but part of it is to get to the end of the process, right? Like, your theme is produce. Part of it is because makers make. You want to have something. It also comes down to doing that work, that generic work, I guess, if you want to put it that way, of getting the internal externalized and just seeing what's there. Like, there's a process of discovery in art that I think we don't talk about a lot, but I think it's intuitive. We all get it, right? You make to discover, right? And that's kind of our relationship to nature too. We go out into nature as a place where we can find things out.
right.
And sometimes we're finding it out about ourselves, and that's what art comes down to. Even though it's, you know, it's weird. It's a weird bird. It's just a bird. What does this show me about myself? I don't know.
I mean, this is where it gets really complicated too. No disrespect to you at all. You know what I mean? Like, this is my dad, who's an artist, everyone in my life who's an artist. But there's a good chance someone will buy this art and put it in their bathroom too, right?
But
So,
it makes sense.
yeah.
It makes sense. And I think as much as this might be just it's just a bird, on a couch. It's weird. It's meant to be weird. But it's also an exercise in balance. And that's kind of what collage process is. You want to. What am I trying? What am I getting out of this? To connect back to psychological materials. I'm a person who wears a lot of hats. Got a lot going on. And so art is one way to sit down and have some meditative time. It's also a way to find some between these different lives that I'm living, right? And that's what the collage represents. It's kind of what it is. It's an attempt to achieve a balance, maybe even a harmony of these contrasting elements. And so that's one way for me to answer the question. Why make art? Like, what is the point? And it's not always obvious. And sometimes I'm sitting there drawing, and I'm drawing, and I'm not doing this. But that is part. On one level, there's the attempt to to do some psychic work,
Yeah,
as it
yeah.
were, some kind of therapy, like on a basic level, it's I need a little more balance in my life. Maybe I can make an art piece that expresses that, achieves that on some level. Not everyone is going to look at it and say, yeah, that compositionally makes sense. That is a balance compositionally, but that's.
I think that's the draw to it, honestly. You know what I mean? As a person who wears a lot of hats, that is the comfort of looking at your art. So just to give a little bit of background, like Eric owns and runs the store, teaches at the local community college, is a visual artist, is a writer. You know what I mean? And so making sense of all of that is really difficult, and like trying to figure out what has meaning. Like I struggle the same thing that I struggle with art. I struggle with as a teacher. What am I actually teaching? You know. And this is why we're doing this show is to look at that why. So this for me is like gold. I'm like, thank you so much because with like. Not to summarize other people's lives, you know, but when we interviewed Maya for our first month, she's doing it for spiritual connection. Like she is convinced that she can channel into some larger spiritual, like talking to God, basically, right? Whatever that means. She doesn't know how to define that, but she can feel that. And then Warren is someone that we interviewed as well. And Warren does it because he remembers forever. It's like a legacy. It's like making children for
and that's part of it.
Yes, it's totally
the process is visible in the product.
Yes. Product. We're back on target. That's awesome. I'm glad that you're a composition teacher. We get back to the thesis. And then we talked to Cindy, the other artist before shows coming out. And for her, it's like connecting to like mythology and finding feminine power, energy by connecting stories and like female art. So she does collage, but with fabrics, right? So it's trying to elevate woman's work as high art, right? And so these are all different whys.
Yeah.
But I think helpful. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like you're, like, you making this might be therapy, but I don't feel like you're selling your issues to people.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting to just think about the extent to which process does become part of the product. Not everyone is going to look at these pieces and see what I see or see what I intended. And it's really easy to have a conversation about what you wanted to do with the piece of art, especially as a writer. I think you can set out with a project and say, I want to write a novel that explores this particular idea, but you might not get there. But every time you talk about the book, you might say that that's what it's about. And so there's a little bit of a tension between your intentions and what makes it into the work. And that's, I think, an interesting thing to kind of try to read into other people's work. So if you're trying to do a conflation of mythology and women's work and fabric art, how much of that is coming across to the audience, and to what extent is that important for them to appreciate what you're going for? How much is the product really defined in its success by the process or by your intentions behind the process? I think it's just an interesting way to engage with other people's work and also your own work.
Yeah, no. And I believe every piece of art that's made is a gift on different levels. The same reason why people the why behind making art is also very similar to like the why of why you would appreciate it and look at it and seek it. And I feel, I mean, again, I'm summarizing and generalizing, which is always bad to do, but I feel like your work is like permission. So when I look at your work, I'm like, oh, I have permission to think. I have permission to like just explore all the different whys, and I don't need answers. I can just think. And that's such a gift, you know what I mean? Like, just to be like, I don't need to figure this out. I just need to like give myself permission in my life to think about it. And so, I don't know. I feel like that's.
I'm glad that's what you're getting from it.
Yeah, that might not be your intention at all, which is great.
No, I think that's a good thing. Yeah, I don't set out with each piece to say this is a piece about this idea. I think for me the process really is about, like I said, about balance, right? Ultimately, like, this is a craft that is aimed toward achieving some kind of balance or some kind of harmony of contrast. So that's what I'm going for. And if there's an idea in it too, then right, an idea beyond that, then that's great. But it's a pretty open field, right? If we're just talking about a kind of compositional balance that is also a thematic balance, you can bring a lot to that.
Honestly, we're getting really close to like something that's actually a controversy in art, I feel like. So there's always a fight between craft and products, right? So process versus product, which is really interesting. So a lot of art schools right now are very theory-based. And a lot of art that's produced, like someone creates the idea, but then it's manufactured by someone else. Which is really interesting. That's a very different way to get to product. And I no judgment on either, but I mean everyone has their preferences.
Sure.
So I come from a craft world where you build something and then at the end what you get is like a gift of discovery, right? Like you're not quite sure how these things are going to go together, but at the end you have this finished piece that shows you something that you never even knew, was going to be at the end of this process,
Discovery,
right? Yeah. And to me that's so exciting and organic. And so oftentimes I'm drawn to art and artists who work that way, which is why that's probably why we keep on interviewing people.
Well, would you draw a hard line between the theorist who designs a product to then be manufactured and the more craft-oriented person?
Of discovery? No, there's no hard line for sure. But I do think that people have a tendency to lean one direction or the other. And I find that really interesting, right? So
that is interesting. It's a situation that seems like context goes a long way to defining someone's attitude.
Yeah.
And the wider your context is, the more you might see both of these different methods as just two versions of the same thing.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's really interesting too because product-driven, theory-driven art is usually for like large commissions and stuff like that, right? So you're literally trying to figure out what someone else is looking for, or you know what I mean?
Sure.
Which is very different from like, I'm going to go on this adventure and at the end we're going to wind up with this beautiful thing that's going to tell us something that we didn't know before. Like to me the impulse just feels so different. And both are necessary. I like both.
Yeah. Well, maybe it is different. I mean, one you might say is more oriented towards self-expression, but again, if we're going to question the extent to which your intended expression is successful in the product, reflected in the product, then it's a bit murky to say that, if you're doing corporate work because you're so successful you're allowed to, that's not self-expressive, whereas someone who's just at home, not in a professional studio, but is doing work with the idea to be self-expressive, that they are somehow more authentically creative or more authentically artistic. I don't know that I would want to draw a hard line.
No, there's like fault in both, for sure. There's fault in both. And I mean, part of this process is for me to become a better person and a better artist, right? Which is like really looking at these supposed like controversies or like fights that I have within myself. Like, I think ultimately what I would love to see happen is a merger. I feel like theory-based artists should also take a couple craft lessons. And I feel like craft-driven artists should read a couple theory books, you know what I mean? And so, and it's the same thing that you were talking about, like, why are we taking this so serious when it's like a holiday? Like, this should just be fun. And at the same time, it's that merger that's so awkward. There's that weird place where I hope that they can intersect, you know what I mean? Because I don't want people to turn off this YouTube channel because it's too, I don't know, because
too strident.
Yeah,
one
exactly.
direction or another.
Yeah. But it's interesting to kind of watch that, right? Like, if you take it too serious, it doesn't work. But if you don't take it serious at all, then you're really devaluing something that's a treasure. And so I see that happening a lot in art as well. So, and we're not going to give you any answers. No, it's just a big bird on a couch.
Yep, that's what it is.
Yep.
And that's good enough.
I think so too, right? Aren't you glad that this is part of you? Not to sell it too
I
hard.
am. I'm
Yeah.
grateful to have a place to show it, and grateful to have the opportunity to spend some time making it. Yeah. And that's been one of the best things about having this space, is being able to let other artists get their work out. And for me, it's great to come in every day and get to see it, but it's also great to know that we're connecting local artists to an audience, right?
Yeah.
Giving people a chance to get out there and expose themselves, expose their work, and just be heard.
This is the myth of sagebrush as I know it. So you know the real story because it's your story, but if I were to retell the myth of Sagebrush Cafe, so your partner June and you, Eric, were full-time high school teachers, beloved high school teachers.
Well, you were right, up till then. No, I don't know. Yeah.
That's not true. I've seen you rate my professor online. Don't stalk him like that. But yeah, he's a good teacher.
What does this have to do with anything?
The space, the art space. Okay.
Great.
Thanks.
So Sagebrush Cafe was created by your partner June and yourself, and you were really successful teachers, high school teachers. And high school teaching is a good gig, it's stable. But the story I heard in the original newspaper article that came out in the 80 what is that, 80 Press? Yeah, I still have that article clipping actually, so I'm like, this is really, yeah, thanks. So the story was that you realized that you could do more good for high school age kids in our community by giving them a place to be themselves, to go to after school, to look at art, to be part of the community. And I don't know how true that story is, so.
Well, June told you that, right? And I think that matches my idea or my memory of what we were doing. We were definitely setting out to create a space that our community didn't have yet, and that we thought was needed or would be helpful. So yeah, so the way that you put it is just I think another way to say that yeah, this space was always meant to be a community space, a space that the kind of space that we thought Westville needed, that the Antelope Valley needed. Yeah, and one of our mantras as we were getting ready, doing the planning and doing the build out, was we want to have a more artistic lifestyle. We said it again and again. Like that was kind of what we were going for, and that was kind of what we were trying to launch ourselves into. And that's meant that we've been able to meet a lot of artists and show a lot of art, and even have opportunities to show our own art, like the show right now. And so it's been a success in that way, right? We have been able to find something of an artistic lifestyle for ourselves and other people.
Right. I think it's also very difficult to feel your own success when you're the one inside of it. But as a community member, I mean, you have ongoing art shows from people in the community, which gives people a voice who normally would never have a voice. Like when I look at some of the artists and art that have come through here, it's some of the best art in my collection, in my opinion, from people who normally would have just stayed quiet, you know? Which, I mean, there's something to be said about that too, but how great to know that these are the voices of our neighborhood and our community. And so not only is it more beautiful, but we can be proud of it. You guys also have like ongoing art installations, right, which are interactive art installations for the community. There's one outside right now, which is, I don't know, it's like a giant Valentine's Day card in the middle of the desert. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's been a real privilege. You know, that's definitely how I think of it. It's been a real privilege to be able to play that role.
Yeah, and you guys also do this incredible like art festival, like in the middle of the year. Like you give booth space, so not only is it a place for the community to have a voice, but to put, you know, like a little price tag on the stuff that they make and have this sense of like value to the things that they do, you know. So, and that's all a lot of work.
It is, and June gets all the credit for that. I mean, she has help every year, but she's the driving force behind the Arts and Crafts Fair. But you know, that to me that connects to the idea that artists are a community, and you're talking about controversies within the community as something to explore, something to think about. But I guess there's a flip side to that too, right? It's the controversies make things rich and exciting and interesting, and they give us ways to reflect on ourselves and what we're doing when we put ourselves out there as artists. I think maybe that's why it's a little contentious, is that everybody's exposed, everyone is open to judgment. But the flip side is that there's a community of other people who are making work, who are doing the produce that you're talking about, right? Who are just sitting at home and beading necklaces, or sitting at home and doing picote, high art, craft art. People are doing all sorts of things, and they're our neighbors.
And the product isn't just like a piece of art, it's community. And I think sometimes that's the part that gets overlooked sometimes, and it's like really vital. Like you also did your own AV like literary journal, which really is giving voice to a really eclectic, you know, I don't know, mouthpiece. Like the Antelope Valley is textured and strange. And so to have a journal that's just our voice, when I think of our community as kind of a place that doesn't always have a voice, you know. So I think that's powerful stuff, you know. I guess that's me saying thank you. With too many words.